The Jewish nation is at war, and at this fateful time, we need to hear voices of truth and courage. The Machon Shilo YouTube channel is excited to present these discussions between the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim, and former prisoner of Zion, Jonathan Pollard.
Shalom, and welcome to all our viewers, and to my very good friend, Jonathan Pollard. Hello,
Shalom, brother.
welcome.
Thank you.
Let us begin our discussion today with the many disparate and confusing reports about supposedly about some kind of deal between Israel and Hamas. What do we actually know about this deal, and what else can you tell us about it?
In some respects, when I look at this situation involving this deal, it reminds me of the Japanese movie Rashomon, in which you have different takes on events by different people, and you really don't know what the truth is or what the reality of the situation is. What do I mean by this? What do we know? We know apparently that there was a very detailed 4-page proposal sent by the government of Israel to the American government. We do not know to this day exactly what is in that document, and I find that to be very troubling. When a document like that is then used publicly, as it was by President Biden on Shabbat, the issue is, what was the purpose of that? What was the strategy behind it? What was he trying to accomplish by publicizing something on a day where the government could not respond? Now, some people have said that he did it on purpose in order to give the government a chance to organize its response. Well, why would he do that?
That's an extremely charitable interpretation.
Yeah, why would he do that if, he was simply repeating what the government had proposed? That doesn't make any sense. On the other hand, shortly after he made his presentation on Shabbat, the government did respond by saying, well, that's not exactly what we agreed to. And of course, the Biden administration responded to that by saying, yes, it is. So in the absence of the document being published, it's a he said, she said type of situation, which is exactly the kind of situation you don't want to get into on such an issue, because you produce confusion. It shows that perhaps you're being evasive and duplicitous. That is, Israel is being duplicitous, because when the president keeps saying, hey, this is your plan, and you keep saying, well, no, it isn't, somebody's lying. And right now, we're the one.
I don't think you have to be a genius to figure out who's lying.
Who's lying on this?
Because we've been here before, only a few weeks ago, less than a month ago, I believe. Biden spoke about some proposal.
Well, what happened?
And it's clear that he actually said things, and the Egyptians also. They spoke for us, as it were, and said that we agreed to X, Y, Z, when in fact we had not agreed to such things.
Yeah, the story that initially came out with that deal that shocked everybody, where Hamas could deliver hostages dead or alive. The story that initially came out that rang true was that the director of Central Intelligence, Burns, had actually manipulated everything so as to get an agreement from Hamas. And just a few weeks later, suddenly everybody's saying it was the Egyptians that had rewritten the deal to accommodate that, and that Burns was red hot. Well, the fact of the matter is, if the Americans had been that angry, and the Qataris had been that angry, allegedly, over what the Egyptians had done, why did they waste so much time allowing us to take all the opprobrium for turning down a deal that we had never offered? The point of the matter is that the Americans are simply not to be trusted in this matter. Fast forward to this latest incident where Biden on Shabbat delivered his version of the Israeli proposal. I don't believe anybody in this matter. I don't believe Biden, I don't believe the Americans, and I certainly don't believe Bibi, and I don't believe the Israeli government at all. Everybody is lying through their teeth. And this gets back to a point that I tried to make 7 months ago, which was, don't get involved in negotiating for hostages. Don't have the Qataris come in. Don't have the Americans come in. Don't have the Egyptians come in. Fight to win. Put enough pressure on the Egyptian, on Hamas, and they'll come forward with a deal to perhaps give up some hostages. But do not lose sight. Do not lose your focus on the principal objective of this war, which is the total and utter destruction of Hamas. So this is what you get. You get all these parties involved with their own agendas, saying things that contradict other things, and it's a hopeless mess. But one thing for sure, and it was no surprise to me, Lapid and Gantz just jumped right in immediately and agreed to what Biden was saying, even though at least Gantz knew what was in that, presumably in that detailed four-page document that was sent to the Americans. Now, why would he agree to something that was completely, apparently different than was in that four-page document that he presumably had approved? Well, because he's reading a script handed to him by the Americans. Gantz and Eisenkot and Gallant, to a certain extent, are what I call the little Herods that the Americans are counting on to depose Bibi. And this hostage deal, they're still trying to use the hostage deal as a means to that end, which
it's all part of the BDS, the Bibi
derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
Copyright Rav. So this gets to another point, which again I've made and have received a lot of pushback on, but I don't care at all. And what is it? Well, it's that the hostage families that have been most vociferous in blaming the government for allowing their loved ones to suffer for all these months are not that concerned about their loved ones. They really aren't. Just like during the anti-judicial reform protests, which were ostensibly about defending democratia, the real aim of those protests was to overthrow a democratically elected government here in Israel. And the same thing is happening now with this group of hostage families that are the willing tools of the same hard left, regressive, not progressive, I'm going to use your term, regressive elements in Israeli society that want to effect a coup d'etat, an overthrow of the current government. And these hostage families, if you listen to them carefully, are clearly using the plight of their loved ones as a weapon to effect a coup d'etat against the current conservative government in Israel. Now, this is a very cynical thing to say on my part. It's a very hurtful thing to say. But unlike a lot of people, I actually listen carefully to what these hostage families are actually saying. And there are a great many other hostage families that are not doing this. And
right, that's an important point.
And that's a very important.
There's not one block of
There isn't one
families
block.
in the country with family members taken hostage.
Correct.
There
aren't.
are at least two groups.
At least.
One of them is clearly aligned with the left. Some of them, the extreme, woke, regressive, anti-civilizational left.
Correct.
And the others tend to be associated with and affiliated with the right. Many of them religious families who understand that the Jewish
nationalist families,
the Jewish nation comes before the Jewish individual, which is, of course, the basis of all warfare. Otherwise, on what basis can you tell an 18-year-old young man, you have to join the army and lay down your life, perhaps?
There was an interesting editorial today in the Jerusalem Post. It was an unsigned editorial on this issue. And I responded quite negatively to it. Why? Because everyone seems to, well, not everyone, but the media in particular and the leftists in general seem to forget that when you democratically elect a government, that government must have the interests of the entire nation at heart, not just any one particular group or even individuals. And this situation with the hostages has shown us just how immature a democracy we actually are, because we don't understand this. As I've mentioned before on these podcasts, I was told for 30 years that the government was sorry, but that the Americans were asking too much for my release. And I understood that. Well, here again, if these leftists really understood and cared, not understood, but cared about what was really at stake with these hostage negotiations, they would understand that what they needed to do was to be quiet. And maybe they should join the Tsav 9 groups that are down blocking the aid to Hamas, otherwise known as humanitarian aid, but blocking those convoys going into Gaza until their loved ones are released, or at least there's some proof of life given, or the Red Cross has been given access to them or something. But the fact that they will not do that tells me a lot about what their ulterior aim is. So when you go back to this agreement and you look at what Biden actually said, and there was on Shabbat, and there was an excellent piece written this week in the Jerusalem Post by a dear friend of mine, David Weinberg, that lays it out beautifully. What exactly Biden, the American administration's objective is in all of this. Forget about what was written in that four-page document. Let's listen to what and regard what Biden said was in there. What he said basically was, you're not going to finish Hamas off. You're going to let them survive, bottom line. You're going to evacuate all of Gaza, meaning they really win. And this will lead to some utopia where there'll be an agreement with Saudi Arabia for recognition. There'll be a Palestinian state, et cetera, et cetera. It had nothing. It was very good. It was a very good modification of whatever we gave them. And for the world, it was compelling because it was exactly what everybody had been demanding we do, which is commit suicide. And as far as the hostages are concerned, there was no guarantee in what Biden was saying that we were going to get everybody at all. The only thing you could take with the takeaway from what Biden's understanding of the peace deal offered by Israel was, we will have a ceasefire leading to a permanent ceasefire, leading to an end of the war the survival of Hamas, and basically the complete defeat of Israel in this conflict. He said, for example, you've already destroyed enough of Hamas, so they won't come back. And the fact of the matter is, the Americans themselves, the American intelligence community themselves have said, we've maybe destroyed about 30% of Hamas's forces, and maybe found less than 50% of their tunnel system. This is not, a victory. It's the same thing they did after the Iranians attacked us, and, we responded minimally. But after the Iranian attack, ballistic missile, drone, and cruise missile attacks had been defeated, the first thing Biden said was, take your victory. Don't retaliate. You won, which was anything but the case. And they're doing the same thing here by pretending that this peace agreement or this hostage deal implies that Hamas has been defeated, when in fact, I can't believe in this 4-page document that was sent, anything of the sort was said. But again, this gets down to the following point. Why doesn't Bibi just release the document so everybody can see what's in it? I mean, presumably,
the obvious answer is that there are many things there he does not wish you to see.
Correct.
Which of course leaves me no choice but to mention, by the by, that there was another major agreement that Mr. Netanyahu signed on for, most of which was redacted and blacked out. I refer to the agreement between Israel and Pfizer with regards to their illegal mass medical experimentation on human beings with unknown substances. Correct. To this day, you cannot know what Israel committed to, and was supposed to receive and supposed to provide in terms of health records and all kinds of results. Israel was turned into a
guinea pig.
The medical laboratory, and the Israeli citizens were the lab rats for Pfizer. This was done by Netanyahu. This has to be stated plainly.
Right.
And so, and no one can deny what I just said for the simple fact that they cannot tell me that that's not what the agreement states, because they haven't seen the agreement, because no one's seen it.
I've asked, and others have asked, through Freedom of Information, the Freedom of Information Act equivalent here, to see the document, and this is 4 years later.
There's no such thing.
I'm not even getting a response to my requests.
There's no such thing. It's a joke.
So it's the same thing with this document. Whether they release it or not is not the point. The point is, everybody right now should be demanding to see an unredacted version of that proposed deal, that 4-page deal that the government passed to the Americans and that was subsequently passed to the Qatar and Hamas.
No argument about that.
If our enemies have seen what's in the document, why can't our people see it?
What are
they afraid of?
What are they afraid of? That is precisely the point that both Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir and Minister of Finance Bezalel Smotrich, both of them have said that we demanded to see the deal, the proposed deal, and we have not been showed it.
Correct.
And that is one of the reasons they say they will oppose any such deal. Now, let me ask you the following question. Let us say that Netanyahu continues to refuse to allow his own ministers to see the deal. What has actually been agreed to, if in fact anything has been agreed to, because there's so much hype and obfuscation and deliberate misrepresentation that one doesn't know exactly what's going on. But let's assume there's some deal and he wants to push it through. Do you think, A, that Smotrich's party and Ben-Gvir's party will leave the coalition, or will say flatly, no way, we are not going along with this? And if they do so, will the usual useful idiots and culprits, Lapid, Gantz, Eisenkot, will they leap into the breach and shore up the government to guarantee that such a deal goes through? And if so, would such a deal be, how would such a deal affect Netanyahu's political prospects?
I believe that if a deal goes through that does not call, on one hand, does not require the destruction of Hamas or include the destruction of Hamas, or the release of some pretty bad security prisoners, he might get this deal approved. He might. And it's not because of Lapid coming in, but because of the Haredi and Shas, which we'll talk about, I think, in a minute. But he will be committing political suicide by doing that. Because once there's been a ceasefire, let me back up for a second. You have to understand something, that this hostage deal is not occurring in a vacuum. We have a situation up north, which, according to the press and according to our chief of staff, may end up in a full-blown war by mid-June. Okay? So everything that's happening with regard to this hostage deal has to be seen in the context of this impending war. Now, if we surrender on our southern front, there will be such an outrage expressed in this country that it will have, in effect, a very damaging effect on the morale of our soldiers, who will be expected to engage in a horrendous conflict with Hezbollah in the north. After all of our sacrifices, not mentioning, of course, the civilians that were butchered on October 7th, but looking at all the Chayalim, the soldiers who have served heroically and many of whom have died. I mean, I wish people would understand that the numbers of dead do not reflect the carnage. Thousands and thousands of our Chayalim, of our soldiers, have been seriously wounded, many of whom lost limbs, were burned horribly, will be paralyzed for the rest of their lives. We have sacrificed so much for one end. And let's be serious about this. It isn't about the hostages, it's about destroying Hamas. That for Bibi to say, okay, with this deal, okay, we're going to have a 4-week ceasefire or a 5-week ceasefire, which only gives the enemy time to re-equip, reposition, refocus their own defenses, whatever. It will only result in additional casualties, and everybody knows this. Even if we get every single one of the hostages, dead or alive, back, Bibi has to be crazy to assume that in the next election, most of those hostages will appear in attack ads by the left saying, "Why did you leave us suffer? Why did you let me be raped over and over and over again? Why couldn't you have reached a deal earlier that would have allowed me to come home to my family?" That's what's going to happen. There's no upside to this deal for Bibi at all. None, if he agrees to it.
I should add, and perhaps I might be accused of speaking without sufficient evidence, but I think it's clear that if any such deal is reached, no matter what any such agreement may in fact say, the Americans will have promised all the various Arab parties, not just Hamas, the Egyptians, the Qataris, you name it, the Americans will have promised that no matter what the deal says, we'll make sure that the fighting is not picked up again.
Correct.
In other words, any ceasefire will be a permanent ceasefire.
Correct.
Because,
and we shouldn't.
Because Biden and his minions want nothing more than to see the back of this war before the elections.
Correct. The minute there's a ceasefire, for whatever duration, you will have Biden making a highly political speech, prime time, that we have achieved peace. That yes,
peace in our time, perhaps.
Peace, waving a piece of paper. Yes, peace in our times, and that we all know that this war will not start up again. Look, the deal as Biden has presented it allows his version. Okay, allows all the Gazans to go back to wherever they started out with. Well, does that mean Hamas also? Well, yes, because Hamas, they don't wear uniforms half the time. So we can only assume that thousands of them will either reappear or redeploy to areas.
Well, let's just state, call a spade a spade. There is no distinction between Hamas and the general population. All of it is Hamas. Hamas is simply
the military arm.
The military arm and expression of the will of that populace.
Correct. So if there is a ceasefire,
and that by the way is the reason that one of the war aims defined by the government as a military and ruling operation is impossible to achieve. There's no such thing as Hamas. There is whose national will or ethnic, religious, Islamo-Nazi ideology is to wipe out all the Jews, first of all in Israel, and second of all throughout the world, because their ideology is to take over the entire world and subjugate everyone to Islam.
During the Second World War, we referred to Germany as Nazi Germany, right? And here, I always refer to it as Hamas Gaza, because that's exactly what it is. The hostages that have been released have been very clear about the fact that the good citizens of Gaza, were part and parcel of the whole operation. They were held by citizens in some cases. They were paraded around and degraded by a multitude of citizens in Gaza. And the ones that came in and did most of the butchering were citizens. Were not the Nukba forces. They were under the control of the Nukba forces. But this has all been confirmed by the survivors. Okay? So if Bibi, getting back to your original question now, if Bibi agrees to any deal that involves a ceasefire, and even if we get all the hostages back, dead or alive, which I doubt, he will have basically committed political suicide. It's as simple as that.
And what would then transpire in the wake of such a deal?
Well, what would transpire
politically?
The immediate problem for him is once the guns fall silent. Here's the problem for him. Once the guns fall silent in the South, comes the day after. And he doesn't have a clue as to what that will mean. And Gantz, he can put out all these beautiful videos of Singapore on the Mediterranean. He can, Gantz or Gallant can come out with all this Narschkeit, this stupidity, this stuyot about we're going to have other countries in there providing security,
Yeah, of course. The Fijians are just
waiting. They're just waiting.
What's the expression?
Chomping at the bits.
Chomping at the bit. That's what I wanted. Yes, thank you. Chomping at the bit to send their soldiers over here to police Gaza. That's exactly all the Norwegians, perhaps.
They deserve it.
Yes, they deserve it. They deserve each other. That's true.
No, it's just this is the problem for Bibi. That if there is a ceasefire, the guns fall silent, there will, as you pointed out, there will be an immediate effort by the Biden administration for political purposes, to declare the war is over. And then comes the day after. And then the real pressure will come on Bibi in terms of what do we do now? Okay. And remember, there's a war that's going to break out very soon up north, apparently. So this is like a perfect storm for Bibi. He has shown things up that I couldn't imagine it being any worse than it is right now.
Well,
For him.
this is what happens when you have a secular, liberal-minded person who claims to be a leader. I don't think he really is much of a leader at all. I think he was a good finance minister, but that's about it. Way back when, who forever puts off making real decisions and will never pull the trigger. When that kind of situation persists for decades, essentially, but certainly for the last 20 years, shall we say, everything that has happened, whether it's the increasing power and reach and audacity of the Iranians and the increasing presence of Iranian proxies surrounding Israel. This is a well-known policy of the Revolutionary Guards and the Iranian leadership. They've been doing this for literally decades. They know what they've been doing.
Ever
They've been
since
working at it
Khomeini.
very hard, and they're very good at what they do. There's nothing surprising about the situation. Nothing whatsoever. Nothing unpredictable.
I hate to use the word inevitable, but the situation we're in was the inevitable result of Bibi's inability to pull the trigger at any time. At any time. This is the result.
I don't wish to put all the blame for our situation on Netanyahu.
No.
Because the truth is these things, the collapse of the Israeli position and Israeli policies and Israeli action did not begin under Netanyahu. It began all the way immediately in the wake of the Yom Kippur War, which led to the Camp David Accords, which led directly to the Oslo Accords, which led directly to the fleeing from Lebanon under Ehud Barak, which of course presents us with the Hezbollah, our northern border, which then led inexorably
to the intifadas,
of course, to the various so-called uprisings. It also led inexorably to Ariel Sharon's fleeing from Hitnatkut in Hebrew, the disengagement from Gaza. But what if not those various moves and accords and agreements? What brought us to this climb, if not all of those that we mentioned?
We have to remember that there was a little sign on President Harry Truman's desk that said, "The buck stops here." And unfortunately for Bibi, I guess he forgot that. But regardless of what preceded him or what events led up to this moment, this terrible moment of October 7th, he inherited that. And he's making a hash out of it.
And he also he actually facilitated some of these things to the extent that he, in the last final crucial vote in the Knesset on the so-called disengagement from Gaza, where in 2005 he voted for it.
He showed up.
He was opposed to it all along, correctly so. But in the final vote, he showed up for it and voted for it in favor. Correct. Second of all, it was at his initiative, essentially. Yes, there was pressure, but that's precisely why he was voted into power, to resist such pressure. But it was he who, in 2011, October 2011, decided to go ahead with this disastrous deal to release 1,027
the Shalit deal.
Hamas leaders and terrorists for one Israeli soldier. And we all know who one of those people released in that deal was. His name is Sinwar, and he's the reason, one of the reasons that we are where we are. That was a completely gratuitous, and that was what we call in tennis an unforced error. That's not something that Netanyahu had to do at that time.
No.
Yes, there were lots of posters on the highways, and there was a well-funded campaign by the usual suspects, George Soros and the Swedes and the Germans and the UK, and the New Israel Fund to do something to release Gilad Shalit, true, but there were plenty of people who were not for it, and he could have just said no.
And we'd already had a precedent-setting exchange of a huge number of prisoners that was a complete fiasco. So we knew what the consequences of he knew what the consequences of the deal was, but he needed that photo op. He needed the photo op of
And
him
he naively and even stupidly, despite the fact that he's a highly intelligent man, but that doesn't a person can be highly intelligent in some respects and nevertheless be lacking in wisdom and understanding. And
we call that seichel.
he somehow convinced himself that if he brought Gilad Shalit home at whatever price, that he would garner such favor with the Tel Aviv leftists that he would remain in power forever.
This is why I said before that if he thinks that most of the hostages who are going to could be released, living hostages, are going to sing his praises afterwards, especially during a hotly contested election.
That's not going to happen.
It isn't going to happen. Just the opposite. They will be weaponized in attack ads against him, and they will be devastating, mostly because the right won't be there for him at all. And they'll say, you know what, stew in your own juices. You release these people at the cost of more October 7th, deal with it. We're not going to back you up.